Do the Right Thing premiered in 1989. It faced negative, even hostile media reception due to its refusal to follow that feel-good rule Hollywood imposes on stories about race. Director Spike Lee was not taken seriously early in his career, but this film is now considered pioneering and culturally significant. It has been included for preservation in the National Film Registry. Lee is taking his rightful place as a powerful creative force, and many consider this movie, although it is an early one, his masterpiece to date. This script uses the vignette style of storytelling. Vignettes are short scenes that focus on one moment or defining detail about a character, idea, or other element of the story. Vignettes are mostly descriptive. In fact, they often contain little or no plot detail. This story takes place within a 24-hour period on the hottest day of the year in summer. Each small vignette features just a few people, showing us some of the ways life is unnecessarily harder in a predominantly Black, poor neighborhood where people are powerless to change their lives. These vignettes add up to a larger portrait of Black life and how an endless array of simmering frustrations add up to a larger act when Mookie throws the trash can through the pizzeria window. The vignettes are tied together through Mookie, who delivers pizza. And the day is punctuated by a DJ character, Senor Love Daddy, the omniscient guide and commenter on all things in the neighborhood. He starts the day ringing an alarm clock, telling people to wake up. He tells us the passage of time and shouts encouragement or asks the people to calm down. He also ends the film dedicating a song to the murdered Radio Raheem. Spike Lee directed, wrote the script, starred in, and also served as its producer, making this film a reflection of a truly auteur voice. There is an increasing amount of scholarship on his work, and I went to the Academy of Motion Pictures Library to research the making of this movie and the scholarly studies about this film. One scholar noted, it's hard to find heroes on screen, but off screen it is easy to do in Do the Right Thing with the creative team. Cinematographer Ernest Dickerson created a rich array of Black skin tones and camera movements. Production designer Wynne Thomas created poetry using textures on every surface and rich colors. He was the first African American to become a member of the Hollywood Art Directors Guild. Costume designer Ruth Carter was the first to show African American street styles on screen, including bright and saturated colors embraced by the Black community. The film's cinematic language uses two sharply different visual styles. The first style uses extreme angles or close-ups in scenes featuring Black characters. We see a liberal use of the Dutch angle during scenes with heightened emotions. The camera tilted to one side is a legacy from early German filmmaking that deliberately makes the audience view the subjects differently, mirroring the way African Americans are automatically viewed differently by society. We also see extreme close-ups to heighten the sense of confrontation and increasing tension as the heat builds during the day, or we see disjointed shots featuring just the heads or other important elements. Many realistic street scenes also feature extreme placement where the actors sit or stand deliberately staged like a theatrical tableau rather than the illusion of realism. This puts Black characters in deliberately choreographed angles as if on display, leading a stilted or artificial look, a visual counterpart to the way we stigmatize people as others or make them outsiders. Spike Lee presents scenes featuring Sal and his pizzeria using the second cinematic language. He uses traditional Hollywood setups sympathetic to the characters, no matter how ugly some of their speech may be. The white men are the center of attention, often shown much larger than the neighborhood residents, reflecting their innate sense of importance and superiority. There are traditional over-the-shoulder shots as they converse, as if they are given more depth of character. Spike Lee intended this to be a visual representation of what we now call white privilege. The neighborhood itself is an important motif in this film. The action takes place and was filmed entirely on location in one block of Stuyvesant Avenue in New York. Universal Studios wanted Lee to film in Baltimore, even though the story took place in New York, because Baltimore would be cheaper. But Spike Lee stuck to his vision and insisted he use this real neighborhood. They used a block that had two empty lots across from each other. On one, they built Sal's Pizzeria with real pizza ovens. And across the street, they built the Korean convenience store. In the top image, you can see the red brick building they attached the set to. This absolute realism was important to Spike Lee's intention for the film. They also located the production office, scene shop, and costume headquarters within a block of this street to keep everything in the neighborhood. With this detail and realism, it is hard to remember that everything in the frame is a deliberate choice. They painted buildings, covered windows, changed window styles, and added all the murals seen in the film. The murals are still there to this day, although they have faded. The production designer painted this building a bright red and closed off a window to create this setting. According to Lee, they tested about 7 different colors of red. This wall is a symbol of the heat in the neighborhood, the temperature and emotional heat that has been building in the community. This shot of the pizzeria interior shows the amount of texture built into the settings. No surface is left untouched. Eventually, we see the neighborhood is more than a motif. It is so ever-present, it could be considered a character alongside the people. Another important motif is windows. The window in Sal's Pizzeria forms an invisible barrier separating them from the people in the neighborhood, a metaphor for how society behaves with invisible rules about race. Periodically, neighborhood characters look into the window, and Sal and his son Pino have an important conversation about their views on race in front of it, while looking at the latest arrivals, Korean immigrants. We follow a vignette about the relationship between the mayor and sister mother that takes place primarily in this window. The mayor tries to break through the invisible barrier of disapproval and judgment by bringing her a flower. Another important window is the radio station, featuring repeated motif, the word love. The film is underscored with music coming from the radio station and played on Radio Rahim's giant boombox. The role of music is an important motif in itself, with these two characters directly involved in the message of the music. The opening credits begin with a plaintive saxophone and bump into a dance sequence scored with Public Enemy's Fight the Power, a strong call to action that becomes a theme throughout the film. Radio Rahim's love and hate rings are a powerful illustration of the contrasting messages in this film and received in the Black community. This contrast comes into focus at the end of the film with Martin Luther King's call for nonviolence and Malcolm X's condoning it. Calls to action are embedded everywhere in this film, linking the events in the story to real live events the audience would know about. Not only does this make the film seem more real, but it features messages a Black audience would immediately understand as culturally significant or sensitive. This adds to the emotional turmoil. Even the graffiti communicated current topics. This graffiti says, "Tawana told the truth." Tawana Brawley was a black woman who accused 4 white men of rape. 2 of them were law enforcement officials. In 1988, the year this film was shot, this was an important cause for black activists. Spike Lee asked costume designer Ruth Carter to use bright colors, in his words, almost blinding Afrocentric clothing. In the 1980s, pride in African heritage led to a number of fashions in African-inspired prints and colors, particularly evident on the figure sitting on the top of the stairs. Mother Sister, an older woman, wears an old-fashioned muumuu or house dress. Young people wear minimal clothing reflecting the heat wave that drives this plot. Here you can see both men and women wear strap t-shirts to keep cool in those bright Afrocentric colors. But the corner street guys, part of an older generation, dress in full trousers and breezy summer button-down shirts. The character Bugging Out, seen at right in the yellow shirt, wears a pattern that is a blend of American and African style, with a band of African print around the center. The man just behind him wears Afrocentric baggy pants in a bright print. He also wears a Lakers shirt, an important aspect of black street fashion in the 1980s. The American general public had not embraced black athletes in professional sports fully until the 1980s. Desegregating basketball was one of the last battlegrounds, with meteoric stars Dr. J. Irving, Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar becoming super celebrities. Nike collaborated with Michael Jordan to create the famous Air Jordan in 1984, just 4 years before this movie was shot. And in 1986, Run DMC became the first hip-hop group to land a sneaker sponsorship from Adidas. Wearing sports apparel became an important part of black street style, and it is reflected in the costumes. Ruth Carter noted that the black community had never seen themselves accurately represented in a film before this. In this scene, the neighborhood residents confront a white gentrifier who has purchased a brownstone. He accidentally scuffed Bugging Out's white sneakers, a prestige item he would have stood hours in line to get. The clueless white guy here wears a Boston basketball t-shirt, a team that kept an all-white starting roster well into the 1980s. Sal and his sons dress in high contrast colors, black and white, with the occasional dark green. Pino, the overt racist in the family, sees the world through a black and white lens, and that is what he wears. You can see him in the upper left-hand corner. Spike Lee plays the part of Mookie, a passive character who doesn't accomplish much during this film. He is an indifferent employee and father. He avoids the conflicts his friends and neighbors are involved in. But in the end, he acts decisively. He throws the trash can through Sal's window. This moment remains one of the most controversial pieces in cinema. It begins with an argument that turns into a fight, that causes a murder, that leads to destroying property, that leads to a riot. The controversy comes from Spike Lee's steadfast refusal to take sides. Who is at fault? There is no obvious villain and no heroes. Everyone is guilty, and depending on how you look at it, both sides could be right. When asked about this, Lee says it's his job to present problems so the discussion can start. Why did Mookie throw the trash can? Was it to protect Sal from the gathering crowd? 30 years after making this film, Spike Lee says that only white people ask him this question. Black people seem to get that he threw the trash can out of years of built-up frustration. Radio Raheem's murder was the final straw, and it was an act of impulsive anger. Spike Lee took a lot of criticism for that action. Mookie and the crowd destroying property. But no one said much about a young black man's murder by the New York Police Department. The film has what we call a non-ending. Nothing has changed after the night of rioting, and life will go on as it has before. But Mookie and Sal would go on to become beloved cinema characters. They later reunite in another film Spike Lee made in 2012 called Red Hook Summer. Sal moves his pizzeria to another neighborhood, and when he needs extra help, he calls Mookie. This film is rich in detail, iconography, character studies, literary devices, and much, much more. We've studied this film for two reasons. It is an excellent example of using texture and color in film. The movie's bright color palette, its sense of contrast, its distinctive characters, and camera framing, and bold assertive movement all suggest a personal sense of style, Spike Lee's style. They all also evoke a cultural history drawing on Black painters, writers, and musicians. With Do the Right Thing, Lee was letting Hollywood know that it too is on the wrong side of history, a problem that is still true today.